I've written a number of stories about sexual child abuse, but this was probably the first one that I wrote. The name of the story is I Won't Be Back for Many a Day. It's a very scary thing for a young boy to be heading out into the world on his own, especially when he's been locked in an orphanage most of his young life. Though I was only 6 or 7 years old, I had many smarts about myself. At least enough smarts to try and survive on my own out on the streets of Jacksonville, Florida. Or so I thought. Even though I was somewhat withdrawn, I was a very aware little boy. I learned very early in life what adults are capable of doing to young boys and girls if they did not do exactly as they were told. Out the second-story window of the boys' dormitory I went. I slid along the roof on my rear end, making my way over to the large oak tree at the end of the porch. I climbed down to the ground, and then I walked along the edge of the building until I got to the azalea bushes. Then I ran as fast as I could towards the large white gates at the entrance of the orphanage. It was rather cold and I was quite scared. This was the very first time that I'd run away from the orphanage all by myself. I had no money, no food, and nowhere to go. However, all that really mattered to me now was getting away from the beatings and the abuse that the matrons gave us. Beatings that we suffered almost on a daily basis. I stopped at the front gates and I turned around to see if anybody was coming after me. Lucky, no one was coming. I just stood there in the dark for a moment. I was remembering a song which I'd heard that evening on the Ed Sullivan Show. Some black guy named Harry something or other kept singing this song. I'm on my way for many a way, I won't be back for many a day, da-da-da and da-da-da, I'm going down to Kingston Town. Well, I was headed to Jacksonville. That was my Kingston Town. I stood there for a moment singing that song very softly to myself. The song told me that there was a good place, a special place for me somewhere in the world, a place that was far, far away from this orphanage. I stood there, silently watching as the cars drove past. I stooped down, hiding myself in the dark shadows of the pine trees and bushes that surrounded the orphanage gates. The cold wind from the passing cars was hitting me, making me shiver as they passed. Bravely, I pulled myself together and I walked out the gates, and down Spring Park Road I went. I was heading out into a world that I knew absolutely nothing about for the very first time. I walked for what seemed to be hours before I came to a large metal bridge that was painted silver. The Main Street Bridge this must be, I said to myself. I raised my collar and I stuck my little hands in my pockets to keep myself warm. I leaned forward, placing one foot in front of the other, and I began walking up the steep incline of the bridge. Huffing and puffing, I made my way to the center portion of the bridge before it stopped. I raised my head and I looked around at the beautiful city of Jacksonville, Florida. Oh, what a beautiful sight it was, thousands upon thousands of lights way off in the darkness. For the first time in my life, hundreds upon hundreds of brightly lit red taillights on the backs of cars as they exited from the large bridge. I looked at the faces of the people in the cars as they passed me by, but not even one of them realized that I was standing there. Now it was just me, scared and all alone. Being out here in the world is no different than being in the orphanage, I thought. There's nobody that really cares in the whole world that cares about me. They don't even know I'm alive. I sat down on the sidewalk of the bridge and I began to cry. Are you okay? Said a strange voice coming from behind me. I jumped up, placed my back against the metal railing of the bridge, and I held on and I just stood there shaking. Are you okay? The man asked me. Yes, sir, I'm just a little bit cold and scared, I told him. Let's get off this here bridge and let's go somewhere that's warm, said the man. We walked for a long time just talking with each other. Then he took me into this little coffee shop restaurant where he bought me a hamburger and a Coke. And he told me that he was a school teacher and that I should not be out on the streets all alone at night, that it was very dangerous, especially for little children. While we were eating, I told him that I was from the orphanage and that I had run away because they beat us all the time. He invited me to come to his apartment for the night so we could talk and be friends. Then he let me take a good hot bath in a real bathtub for the very first time. Then he told me that I could spend the night. We said a prayer together and I asked God if I could stay there and live with him forever and ever. When I fell asleep, I suddenly awoke when I felt the bed jerk. There was my friend Bill standing at the foot of the bed, and he had no clothes on whatsoever. He made me promise on my heart that I would never, ever, ever tell anyone what he did to me that night. After he went to sleep, I got up real quiet-like, and I dressed myself, and I snuck out of the apartment house. In the cold and the darkness, I walked back across the big metal bridge and back through the gates of the orphanage. I stopped for just a moment, and I started to cry. I turned around and I looked back at the outside world through the orphanage fence. Softly, I started singing to myself. I'm on my way for many a way. I won't be back for many a day. Da 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 da. I ain't never going back to Kingston Town.